So this is the very first 20-minute training. And as you can see, we have a really short 2-question poll because we want to get an idea of who is joining us. So we want to thank you for being able to take some time out of your schedule today. We actually decided to launch this 20-minute training series to just provide some quick nuggets and information on topics that may be helpful to you, but also to be able to introduce you to experts and provide additional resources in areas that people have expressed as concerns for them. And so I thank you for being here with us, and I ask that you just take a couple of seconds to be able to
on video right now, but you
participate
will have a chance to all meet each
in the
other
poll.
in breakout rooms. All right, so it's 4:01. Let's get going. I know we have a few other folks who are going to join us in the next few minutes. Of the Project on Workforce at Harvard. Thank you so much for signing up for our first ever.
So we have got an actual another meeting that's taking place. Hold on 1 second so that I can.
Let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to cover.
Get rid of that. All right, wonderful. And we are recording this session, and so you will be able to listen to the recording if you don't get to hear everything as we are going through the event. And so this is slightly different than the meeting Zooms that people may be used to if you haven't participated in a webinar before. So we're going to ask that if you have any questions during the presentation, that you place them in the chat. You're able to send those messages to us. The other place that you can put questions is in the Q&A feature. So you have access to both Q&A and chat. And so after the 20-minute training with our guest, then we will have a Q&A portion that is an optional 10 minutes. And so I am pleased to be able to have my first guest for the 20-minute training be a good friend of mine that has tons of virtual event experience, but I'm going to read a little bit of his bio. Bunmi Samuel is on a mission and a purpose to make sustainable resilience and a must-do attitude in people and communities who aim to maximize their lives. His ability to engage, shape, and impact spaces is his magic, while operating with a peak performance execution. Bunmi aims to support individuals and leaders to transform their belief in what's possible and modeling the resilience and fortitude to achieve longevity. And in these past 12 months, Bunmi and I have produced, co-produced, co-created a number of different virtual events. And we've also had the opportunity to participate in a number of different events. And so we're really excited to share, and it's primarily going to be Bunmi that is sharing in this presentation, and I'll chime in a little bit, but to share what makes virtual events successful and what you can do to make sure that your virtual event is successful. And so, Bunmi, the floor is yours.
Nice. Well, Aisha, first and foremost, I love the fact that I'm first, right? So I love that you put me on first. That means that all the time that we know each other, it means a lot. So I appreciate you. It's 20 plus years of knowing each other. I would say first, before we get into it, because we only have 20 minutes, I'm a New Yorker, so I talk fast. I'm going to try to make sure that I hit all the points that we need to hit. I want to know where people are coming from. So if you can put who you are and where you're coming from in the chat, I think that would be wonderful. I saw Chef Marcel, hey man, already there, but I definitely want to know where people are coming from, because it's very important to, although virtual events obviously run the gamut, it's important to know that every place that you're coming from has its own flavor and style, and people respond differently to culture and how things play out in those locations. So please put that in the chat. So all right, we're gonna go on this ride for the next 20 minutes. I'm in California, so my background is not my normal background, but I'm streaming right here from a hotel in sunny Southern California. So all my folks who are on the East Coast or on the Midwest, I apologize for the snow you've been getting, but I'm looking at a sunny window. So I think before we get into what virtual events are, I think it's important to frame where we are, right? Frame the time that we're in and where we are, because in a nutshell, events are everything. Everything is an event. There's no big event, small event, everything is an event, and you have to approach it like that. So when you're on your social media, when you're out in the world, people are watching you, people are taking their cues from you. Everything is a physical event, even when you don't consider it an event, it's a physical event. And really events are defined, and the definition of an event is really a thing that happens, especially one of importance, right? That's simply what an event is, a thing that happens, especially one of importance. And I know we're talking about success because that's where we want to be. So success is simply defined by the accomplishment of an aim or purpose. So that's just the very bottom line definition of what those things are. An event is a thing of importance, and success has an aim or a purpose. So hopefully we're seeking those things no matter what we do. So I want to change the framework of what we consider events as these big things, but really anything we do is an event. So for the next 19, 18 minutes, let's talk about what we're doing, where we are going, and are we going back? Of course, we know that our world has changed drastically over these 9 months, but we know that we're not going back. We're not going back to what we've seen. We're not going back to what we experienced. Everything we have going forward is gonna be very much different. And it's important for us to realize that, and we have to adjust because we know that we're not going back, and we have to know what we're doing and what our vision is for where we wanna go in terms of this thing called events, or these everyday happenings that we're having. So in terms of that, what are we doing? Where are we going? Are we going back? Is where I want to frame it. Something that's really important, I think we need to know, is that what makes an event really special is that personal connection, right? The person who, we all know what we go to, and we have to kind of analyze what we spend our time doing. The thing that we do most is what we're personally connected to. So the event that if you could think in your mind what event has really struck your attention, it's usually probably about a personal connection or something that's kind of driven you to want to be connected, that's kept you excited about that thing. So for me, before COVID, my event that I really enjoyed, I can remember, was going to Prince's last concert. That was my event. I remember that event. That's our most favorite event out of all the events I've gone through or done over 20 years. I saw Prince at the it was a kid at the casino, his last performance. That always to me would be the main thing that I saw. And why was it important? One, because it was Prince, of course. Two, because I knew it was going to be a production that was going to be amazing. Prince doesn't do anything less than amazing. So it was on time, the way it looked, the way it felt. It was actually something that I got excited about going to. And then three, it was in a place I'd never been to. So it had the elements of, one, it being something that I really was connected to, being Prince. I love his music. Two, being something that I knew was going to have like incredible production value, which for me is really important. I want to be able to feel like someone prepared for it. They thought about it. It was the set was good. The layout was good. So all those things kind of resonate with me. I knew it was going to be that. And then three, it was in a new venue that I also wanted to explore. So from the very beginning, I think we should be reflecting on what makes us attracted to certain events, because that's going to drive also what you should be doing when you go to events itself or you create events itself. I think that because we're in a different space, the traditional tools we used to connecting with folks through have changed. So we have to be flexible enough to adjust how we look at our tools. And we'll talk a little more about that later. And we also have to be considering that everyone's online, which could be a good thing, right? How you actually approach folks, but folks are extremely fatigued by being online all day on Zoom, on Clubhouse, on Facebook, on Instagram, et cetera. So you have to be countering something we never really experienced before, which is attention split and also online fatigue. And the last thing I would say before I go on to the details of how an event really can be successful and dynamic and attractive and make you think about it. I saw Prince maybe 2 years ago, and I still can feel it. I still can kind of, I'm still experiencing it in a very, very deep guttural sense. And I think that's also what we're going for. And that leads to my last point on this aspect of what we have to kind of look at is what the flavor of what you're trying to do. A lot of events that I see don't have the oomph, don't have the it factor, don't have the thing that makes you want to connect to it, right? It doesn't have any specialness to it. They're kind of regurgitated or just done over and over again because they're safe, right? But people want to connect with things that attract them and speak their language. So safety is not the way we want to go. We want to go for the thing that has the flavor and the oomph. And that flavor and oomph, honestly, is you. And you have to know your flavor and oomph, which is really important. So as we kind of talk about some of the details of this virtual space that we're in. I looked at my iPhone yesterday, and I always look at how much time I was online. I was online 8 hours yesterday. You have the little iPhone clock that shows you how much time you've been spending online. I was online 8 hours on Instagram. I think it said 3 hours. I was on Zoom maybe 4 hours. It showed me all the time that I spent online, and it kind of rang in my mind when I was thinking about today was I'm online a lot. I'm online more than I actually even realized. And because of that, I have to be mindful of what I'm drawn to as I'm also creating events and also creating opportunities. So I think and knowing that we're online a lot more with everything changes, 8 hours for me, I want you to ask yourself, how much time are you online? We have to know our tools, right? We have to know if we're on Clubhouse, we're on Zoom, we have our constant contact. What tools are we using to make sure that we're communicating with our audience, right? Looking at our consistency, right? So a lot of times looking for perfection, but really it's consistency. How often are you doing that thing that people order to draw your audience in? So you have an audience that you're trying to reach. How often are you doing it? Is it every Monday at 12 o'clock? Is it every day at 12 o'clock? What is your consistency that really has people know that they can find you? Because as we mentioned, with it being crowded, people are not going to spend a lot of time looking for you, but they know if you're consistent, then they'll tune into you knowing you're going to be there and going to be consistent in being there. Something that me and Aisha talk about all the time are these things called KPIs, right? They're key performance indicators. So if you have an event, you're creating an event, you have to know your KPIs. Your KPIs basically say, what are your indicators that make the event successful? So a KPI, for example, can be, I want to have 40 people at my event, and I want to charge X amount of dollars, and I want to generate this amount of money from the event. I want this amount of people to sign up for my next event. KPIs are very specific indicators that allow you to guide and kind of targets that allow you to drive where you want to go. And the KPI allows also your team, if you have a team, to stay on track because you know what your numbers are, you know what your KPIs are. So key performance indicators are really, really important. And people who are not really, I would say mathematical or aren't really structure oriented have a hard time with KPIs, but KPIs are the metrics we have to go by. And that's really important in terms of our events. The numbers, right? For me, I think me and Aisha did 9 events in the last 9 months. 10, we had a big summit. And one of the things that I've seen a lot of events organizations that they don't know their numbers. As a business owner, you have to know your numbers. You have to know what your financial goals are. You have to have a budget for your event. What are your targets, as we mentioned with the KPIs? What are your costs, right? What's going to cost you to put the event on? That's staffing, that's supplies. What kind of revenue do you want to generate, right? What kind of net profit do you want to make if you're charging for your event, right? So your revenue is what the money you have coming in. Your gross profit is before your cost, and your net profit is after your cost, right? So know your numbers, right? And then the last one, which is new to me, I never really even explored this, but we call it a CAC. It's a customer acquisition cost. So how much does it take for you to get that customer to come to your event, right? How much does it? What's the expense, or what's in terms of sweat equity? What's the expense of getting that customer to join your event, right? That's called the CAC, a customer acquisition cost. So if I go out and I want Aisha to come to my event, what is it going to take for her to walk through, to register and walk through that virtual space, so to speak? Is it going to take me $4 for an ad? Is it going to take me sending a staff person to focus on getting recruitment? What's that cost? It always costs all events, and figuring out what that customer acquisition cost, that CAC, is really important. And last but not least, I mentioned it when I talked about prints. Because everything is an event, when you walk out the house, when you present yourself, it's an event. People are watching you. People are considering whether they want to engage with you, right? People might know me by my hats, right? I always wear my hats. My hats are always colorful. I might have a hoodie on with my logo on the front, my Keep It Pushing logo. But that's my look. That's my feel. And all events have to have that same kind of idea. Is what's the sensual experience you want to have? Want people to have when they come to your event? How do you want the audience to feel? Do you want them to be inspired? Do you want them to feel motivated? Do you want them to be educated by a certain topic? I saw a chef in the audience, and when I look at his online, I love food, right? So when I'm looking at him making food, he's giving me experience. I don't know chef on a personal level, but I know that what he's making, I can taste it. I'm going through a sensual experience when he's actually creating food online. So the question for you is, what kind of sensual experience are you having your audience to go through? What kind of sensual being auditory, it being tactile, right? If you're giving something out, or you're sending something in the mail, or you're asking to print out a workbook, it being something of taste, right? Are you creating a certain kind of giveaway that may include taste, right? But looking at your senses and looking at the sensual experience your audience should have when they engage you is a very key asset for making an event special. I talked about that with Prince, and I'm gonna keep on talking about Prince because I love him. But that just reminds me of what I'm talking about with sensual experience. And I'm a big concert goer, so I remember just all the concerts I've gone to have given me a sensual experience and have tapped into more than one of my senses, which is really, really important. So I think before we go to like a question and answer, because I do want to kind of answer some questions, I really think that vision is key for creating events. I think that we have a lot of duplication of things online, but I'm waiting for the person or persons to create their unique experience that will draw folks in and kind of shift the paradigm in terms of what is possible or what happens online, right? To take the risk of vision, to take the risk of going after a new kind of way of doing events, because the bottom line is that we're going to be in this virtual space pretty indefinitely, and definitely a hybrid space, at least until 2024. Consumer Affairs just submitted a report, or just published a report, and it talks about things not opening up really until 2024. So we're talking about 3 years at least of us being in a very heavy virtual space, if folks are online. How do we want people to engage us, and how do we want to grow our businesses? Because every aspect of what we're doing is an event. Whether you consider it or not, it is an event, and people are watching you. People are looking for your consistency. People are looking for a way to engage you. So Aisha, I'm going to stop there, and I'll mention the books that I have that I want folks to kind of check out that will talk more about how you can actually learn more about these virtual approaches. But let's do some Q&A. Let's have some conversation for the next couple of minutes.
Fantastic. All right. So we're pulling some questions out of the chat to be able to share with you. But one that I saw come up is about tools that people are using, being able to get some insight. Shrim is using Jamboard, has heard of Miro and Flipgrid, but wants to get some insight on some tools that can be useful to make that virtual experience more interactive and engaging.
Yes, I think it all depends on what your audience is. I think you have to really begin to look at who your ideal customer are. We call them ICAs, your ideal customer avatar. So who are you targeting, and what technology you use is going to be connected to who you're targeting, right? We know that Instagram identifies with a certain audience. We know Facebook the same. We know Hopin is becoming popular because it has multiple uses of breakouts and conversations. Of course, Clubhouse is trending because you can be in a conversation, you can be invited on stage. You also can break out into another room on Clubhouse, invite people to break into another room where you can have a conversation one-on-one. So I think the first question I would ask is, what's your avatar? Who are you targeting? What's their age? Where are they located? What do they like to do? What's the demographic of who they are? Because that's going to determine what specific platform you use to engage that audience. And we're not trying to serve all 7.5 billion people in the world. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to serve a specific group of people who are attracted to what we have to offer. And that starts with knowing who you're trying to target, the clarity of that, and then knowing also what they can gain from their engagement with you, right? And that's the vision. That's the implementing the vision. So I would start with that question to the person who asked that question.
Perfect. So the next question that I see is specific for you, and I guess it's related to events, but I think if you can elaborate a little bit, the question is, when are you starting your podcast show, Super Boom? But if you can also just talk a little bit, because like, as you mentioned, all of these different things are an event. And so even a podcast launch, being able to share some information about your process with that and any insight that you can share with people about that as an event.
Yeah, so my podcast comes out of an event, comes out of a life event, right? My podcast is called Courage to Fly. And it really is looking at, and speaking to just doing something different. I haven't seen a podcast that talks about deep triumph, deep victory, and deep motivation. So that's my goal of my podcast, Courage to Fly. I'm going to be launching in March. And the goal of the podcast is to take guests. I'll be doing a lot of talking about my experiences. I've had many experiences, but to take guests who have had very extreme, challenging and dynamic experiences, and have them talk about not just the good times of that experience, but talk about the challenges of that experience and how they broke through. So if I would put one word on the branding of what the podcast is about, is breakthrough. It's about breakthrough. It's about triumph. It's about victory. So that's what we're doing in March with Courage to Fly. And it's also one of my stages. So as I speak more on stages and get invited to speak more on stages, the podcast is a stage. Right now, when we talk to Aisha and you guys as a stage, all these things, we have to shift how we see them from us going to like physical things that are really huge and big to every time we crack that computer, crack that technology, open our mouths, we are presenting, we're on stage and we're presenting information in event form. Every time we do that, we have to consider that's an event.
So I've got two more. So thank you, Kilolo. And I think March was the date that I heard, or the time frame that I heard from Bunmi for that. So an additional question is, when considering the CAC, cost to acquire a customer, you normally think about a product, but when it comes to an event, what's the best way to think about that number?
So I think that you look at the hours you spend to spend trying to engage that customer. So if I was looking at, for me promoting, say, this event and looking at my time on Instagram over the last X amount of days, maybe I was promoting for 4 days or 5 days, for example, I would look at the amount of hours spent online, specifically promoting the event. And then I also look at the value of my time, right? So I might look at the amount of hours times what I want to quote unquote pay myself for my time. And that would look at, that would be like how would evaluate that. So if I want to pay myself $20 an hour and I spent 3 hours online throughout the last 4 days promoting that event, and it cost me $60, for example, and that I kind of monitor over that 4 days how many people registered, and it was, say, 30 people. Doing the math of that, it was $2 per person to get them into the event, right? So I would do the math that way. I would look at time versus what I'm paying myself for the time, what you're paying staff, and then look at how many folks came into your event space for that actual event itself, registration wise. And it's a number. You're not charging. It's a number. It's still about keeping your numbers and making sure you budget, because your time is worth something. Your equity, your sweat equity is worth something, and that then builds you up. So when you actually have larger events, then you have a metric. You have a number in metrics. You can use that number to then pay yourself for the time you're spending. But you have to, doing the numbers is really, really, I would say, the most important aspect of anything that we're doing is knowing those numbers.
Fantastic. And someone asked the name of your podcast. So that's Courage to Fly.
Yep.
And then another question that we had is the time slot to premiere your post. So you're talking about consistency, making sure that you're letting people know that I'll be on every whatever, date and time. Is there a premium time slot to be able, or a premiere time slot to be able to launch?
So I think because of this virtual space we're in, we're seeing folks online all the time, right? We're seeing folks who are, I was reading something about Clubhouse, and folks who are literally sleeping with Clubhouse on in their ears. It's a strange time in terms of when to catch folks, but I would look at your demographic, who you're trying to reach, the lifestyle they have, right? And what their structure is. So if I'm catering, say I have a podcast about HR professionals. I know my HR professionals are probably pretty busy between 9 and 12 and pretty busy between 1 and 5. They may take lunch at 12, right? So I might want to target my communication around 12 to 1, where I know they might have time off of work or they might have more flexibility, but it's really knowing the demographic and knowing their lifestyle, knowing what they're engaged in order for you to kind of target the time. It also takes you kind of playing with time as well. So that goes back to the experiment and the vision and the really trying, not just having perfection, but trying different things, because every platform that we are talking about has evaluation tools, has insights. So you can look at when your numbers rise, when your numbers drop, and you might just do what we call A/B testing, where you're testing out, I went on at 9, I went on at 12. What was my response time between those different times, right? So I try for 3 weeks, different times, and then the time that I get more attention, more engagement. That's the time I want to go with. So after 3 weeks, maybe going into the 4th week, I begin to do this thing that is more consistent because I now know what my audience is kind of logging in. I do it all the time with my posts now. I know that I get a lot of traffic, definitely around 10 a.m. So I post more at 10 a.m. And that's it's just a strategy in terms of knowing, who your audience is and where they are.
Fantastic. And I think this kind of aligns with the same answer that you just provided. We have a question about, do you recommend some of the tools that you suggested being used to share information with students through a church scholarship ministry? And I think that does go back to what you were saying
Yeah.
about knowing your audience. And so are those some of the same tools that you would recommend for that demographic?
Yeah, so I think with students, one, because I love young people, you want to have young people advise you on what young people are doing. So as we get older, although we might remember when we were young, we're not as young as we used to be. So a young person can tell you where the students are hanging out. And students sometimes, they may be perceived as really flaky, but they're really attentive, right? So even if they're not, you don't think they're online, you don't think they're watching, they like to watch, right? They might not comment, they might not turn their screen on when they're online, when you're doing Zoom, but they are listening and they're attentive. And the best thing I think for you to do would be to, one, get a student on board with you, right? To be a part of your steering committee to find out how to engage that scholarship and spread the word. But two, also to not take it personal that they're not always communicating in the same way we like to communicate. I used to get very frustrated when I used to work with young people. I work with young people a lot more, where I would come in a room and they would have their headphones on. Right? I would think that was like a thing for me. I was like, how dare you, right? Or I would go online and have all their cameras off, right, in the Zoom space. But when I asked them a question, they responded, right? It was really not about them not being interested. It was about them being shy, them being self-conscious, them not being ready to communicate and talk. So I think we have to be careful of all things, even with adults and events and event success, is not taking it personal that what we think the response we want to get is not immediately what we get. Because people will tell you everything about what you're doing, although you have not seen them comment one time, like one thing, respond to one thing, respond to an email, they are still watching and still engaging and still a viable audience for you. So just be mindful of that perception and that assumption that we make sometimes with folks and how they respond.
I'm going to ask one last question before we wrap up. And that is the question that came about icebreakers. What kind of icebreakers are great to start for a virtual platform? And I know one of ours of choice is music and being able to make sure that the energy is right as people enter a space. But are there other icebreaker suggestions that you have?
So, yeah, I think back to the audience, I think if you're talking about sports, maybe doing trivia, right, to open up the room, right, talking about something that's attracting folks to what they're really passionate about. Back to my Prince analogy, I would do, if I was doing a Prince event, I would do, the top 5 Prince songs and have people put them in the chat, or I would do, wear your favorite Prince shirt to the event, right, and then shout people out. People want to be engaged. People want to feel like they belong. So I think as long as you are engaging them, and similar to what I did when I first got on, I asked everybody to put the information in the chat. And I also asked 3 essential questions when I first started. I didn't just come in and just start talking to you guys. Even if you guys weren't aware of it, I was beginning that conversational tone of the event, which was important. So I think having conversational tone, engaging them around what might be of interest to them specifically and why they came, and getting them to communicate then opens them up to then listening more, right? Once they're past just kind of like, okay, what is this about? Once they begin the frame of listening, communicating out, responding, I'm Bunmi Samuel, I'm from New York City, in the chat, then they're more apt to be attentive to what you're talking about because they already are engaged. So I think that's really important in terms of their engagement. The first kind of team building, opening up an event, and then also closing with that same kind of energy is important too.
Absolutely. And I think, as you mentioned, you opened with a question, and it's also helping to prime the audience for how you want them to engage throughout the event. And so I know we mentioned being able to use the Q&A feature, being able to use the chat. And so I thank you all for engaging, but that also shows you how to be able to help during your events to be able to get people acclimated to using that. And so you all used both the Q&A and the chat to connect with us because we provided those those prompts. And so I know I mentioned that it was going to go quick and it's like a speed marathon. I do want to thank Miss Dora, who also sent a message in the Q&A about wiglets.info, which is a client that we've been working with, but she's been able to gain some insight from your presentation, Bunmi, and just talking about how to engage. And I was just trying to see if she had a question, because what we're going to ask is if anyone else has a question that we didn't get to address, if you can put it into the chat, then we're going to send a recap of this. And we're also going to send the answers to any of the questions that we may not have had an opportunity to be able to address at this
Can
time.
I share my books real quick?
Of course, absolutely. Yes and yes.
So I have 3 books that I want to recommend to everyone. The first book is called The Buddha and the Badass. It's about infrastructure for business. So it's The Buddha and the Badass. It's by Vishen Lakhani. He's the guy that owns Mind Valley, the very prominent meditation and kind of wellness app. So Buddha and the Badass is incredible. And that's really infrastructure, right? Getting your infrastructure down, your value system down. What are you really about and the vision that you actually have? The second business book I would say for running a business would be E-Myth, a really good book by Michael E. Gerber, E-Myth, E-Myth, by Michael E. Gerber. He has a series of books for different kinds of environments, HR E-Myth, business E-Myth. So he has a bunch of those kind of takeoffs of books, kind of like chicken noodle soup for the soul, those kind of things. Thank you, Aisha. And then the last one is Contagious. Contagious being the book by Jonah Berger. I think Jonah's at UPenn. It's kind of capturing the imagination and why things stick. It's kind of out of that same Blink and the Tipping Point and Malcolm Gladwell kind of feel, but it looks at behavior and really that all behavior that we see from adults is really emotional first. We think that it's thoughtful, but it's really emotional. And how do we really capture people's emotions through what we're trying to do and take care of them, but also capture their emotion? And Contagious is one of those books that talks about why things catch on. So those 3 books I would say are great authorities on what we're talking about. And if you read those 3 books, those are all 3 books that are going to be amazing and take you on your way for what you're trying to do.
Fantastic. And so I thank you all for being able to spend time with us today to participate in this 20-minute training. I'm going to ask that you please complete the survey that we send you, and it will be sent with the replay. And so we just want to get some feedback, get some insight from you about what things you need and about how we can be of service. And I'm also going to request that you spread the word and that you join us for our next event, which is on March the 23rd. And so one of those other little tips that we're going to share with you that I love is Canva. And so if you're not good with PowerPoint or some of the other things that are technical, you can create a slide like this on Canva and share some of the information that you want your attendees to have. So I thank you all for joining us. We will be sure to send the follow-up replay. Make sure that you stay connected. We will be announcing a virtual event challenge that we have coming up in March. So make sure that you stay tuned, stay connected, and be well. Thank you.